Hi, this is David Rice. I have the Substack Hit Christian. You can find me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Rumble, YouTube, and Missouri Liberty Radio, which is broadcast out of Owensville. I am again here with Terry Hyten. He wrote the book Ukraine Meets American Empire. I don't know if it's going to show up with my filter. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like it.
Shows
But
up kind of, sort of,
Kind of. But I will put it up on the link, and so you'll be able to see the picture there. And we've met before. We had a audio interview, and we discussed your book and some of the overview. We did like a highlight reel of it, but we wanted to get deeper into the book this time and discuss some more important topics. And I know recently Zelensky has said that he's looking towards ending the war or he sees an end in sight.
um,
I don't know if you've seen that.
if you're looking for me to respond, I mean, I
Yeah.
think Zelensky says a lot of things. I think
Mhm.
a lot of it is just either for internal consumption, I mean, so the morale doesn't crash around his country, or maybe for consumption here in America. But I think that most of the things he says are really not dealing in reality. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I think it's mostly political. I agree with you. He seems to be a political animal. So w- dealing with this book and the title, Ukraine Meets the American Empire, why have you described America as an empire?
Yeah, that's because America is an empire. I mean, we act like an empire. I mean, I don't think when you're living in empire status, if you want to call it that, which is what America is actually living in. We can I can write another entirely book how we ended up being an empire.
Yeah.
Okay, but post World War II, we became an empire. I mean, we were an ascending empire before World War II, but we definitely grasped the reins after World War II, and we became an empire. Now, the couple problems with empires, they're extremely expensive,
Hmm.
as we're finding out. And secondly, if you act like an empire, other countries uh, naturally push back and resent the empiritis, and you tend to overreach. And I think we're all in that declining phase of empires in America. So that's one major theme of the book that's kind of I can't say it's understated, but it's a thread that runs throughout the book, that we are an empire, that we're acting like an empire, and empires tend to do things they shouldn't have, especially in foreign lands. Rome's a prime example at this point in time. So I mean,
Is there another Western nation or example besides Rome that really exemplifies where we are now? Overreaching, stepping into countries where we don't belong, trying to control the outcomes of political leaders that aren't really our responsibility.
that's a good question. Okay, and the one that immediately comes to my mind is the British Empire.
Yeah.
And basically, I mean, it just there's only one or two sentences in the book that actually state this, so it's hard to pick up from that small thread. But what happened is that the British Empire ruled. The sun never sets on the British Empire. For 3 or 4 centuries, that was actually the case. So when Britain declined, and I mean, especially they were in decline after World War One. Okay,
Mhm.
but after World War II, they basically collapsed as an empire. But they handed off the baton to America.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you want to look at Western civilization that way, you know, Britain handed off the baton of empiritis to America, and we're kind of like cousins. I mean, we're the same nationalities. Basically, we're the same Western civilization. Uh, so it wasn't earth-shattering to the world geopolitical structure that we inherited that mantle. Okay, and Britain or England now and the United States are still joined at the hip pretty much. Okay, they follow us a lot. Let's put it that way. And London is one of the two financial capitals of the world still. Okay, so London and New York yield a lot of influence and a lot of empire, a lot of power throughout the world still.
So in the book, you give a really good history and you kind of lay out the period of time where America started that rise to empire or power status. And you talk about it starting mostly after World War II, but there are moments where there's taste where we're tasting that empire before World War II, and we're enjoying that the flavor of that. But after World War II, it really ramps up. And why is that?
For Britain, you mean?
Or for us, US, why after World War
Well,
II?
we were actually the only country left standing after World War II in the sense, only major country left standing. We obliterated Europe. I mean, Europe was in basically total collapse. I mean, because of the war what happened on their continent. And we've been blessed with two oceans, the Atlantic Ocean, Pacific Ocean,
Mhm.
and nothing touched our land. Okay, there was no warfare here. And that helped everything like that. And we, at some point in time, after World War II, we were the only large manufacturing base that existed in the world for a period of time. And we were producing 70–80% of the world's goods throughout the world. And that's a large, to maintain military power, you have to have a large economic industrial base. And that's what we had. So, I mean, so our empire-itis developed from that huge base and that safe base that, with the advent of nuclear weapons, now it's changed quite a bit, unfortunately, because missiles can reach America.
Yeah,
But that hasn't happened yet. We're blessed because that hasn't happened. Okay.
yeah.
So
And
that helps.
sometimes you wonder how long that um, detente will last. So looking past our manufacturing base, we start to interfere with other nations fairly quickly. We have a history of already doing this, but after World War II, it sort of ramps up. We have our organizations like the CIA, and they start going into countries, and you explain this through NATO or through other organizations, where they start to overthrow uh, duly elected individuals who are maybe individuals who don't share our interests, and we get rid of them, and we act as an empire without really needing to own the land. We just need the people to genuflect towards us.
Correct. Yes. I mean, there's a large structure. The role of the reserve currency of the U.S. dollar allows that to happen quite a bit. But focusing, we can talk about other nations for a long time that we've
Yeah.
interfered with. But one of the nations we interfered with quite rapidly after World War II, and I was not aware of this when I started writing the book, was Ukraine. I mean, the CIA and our military went into Ukraine almost immediately after World War II during the Cold War, at the height of the Cold War.
Mhm.
And we were really, really attempting to infiltrate the Soviet Union through Ukraine, basically for the last 50 years. And that, to me, that's an astonishing fact. So we really, that uh, framework has existed for a long time. Uh, we just ramped that framework up after 2014 when Russia went into Crimea. We can talk about that too if you want to. I mean,
Yeah, because I think the CIA was funding organizations that most Americans would be appalled at. This neo-Nazi organization that's in Ukraine. Um, they they represent some of the worst impulses in racial tensions, and yet we are the probably the organization that's largely responsible for them existing.
yes, you know. So, and the other, I mean, from my point of view, we've overextended ourselves.
Sure.
One of the red flags of overextension is just the amount of debt that we accumulated. A large chunk of that debt, or a large percentage of that debt, is just basically related to our involvement overseas. I mean, where our military is running about $1 trillion a year. If you
Yeah.
look at uh, the expenditures of the United States military industrial complex to foreign countries, especially Russia and China, I mean, we far outspend them. And Russia in particular, we spend 10 times as much on our military establishment as Russia does. So, I mean, that
Mhm.
should lead most logically thinking Americans to ask the question, okay, who's the threat here? Okay, I
Yeah.
mean, we're spending, I mean, if Russia is only spending 1/10 of the military budget as we are, how much of a threat are they?
Mhm.
Uh, the other irony is, it comes out in the book too, which is like, I attempted to address that, and I think it's an important factor, is that the Soviet Union actually collapsed after in 1991. That Berlin Wall fell down.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there was a change for the better for a period of time that resulted. There was a benefit to just what I'm sure on the Russian side they considered to be the end of the Cold War. I'm not so sure that our establishment hasn't reinstated the Cold War, if not attempting to push us into a hot war, to be honest with you.
So
So,
how do Americans understand that we are part of an empire? We're part of an empire that's very interested in either a Cold War or hot war with Russia. How do we get past this idea that we're the good guy?
well, I mean, that's based upon education, and that's unfortunately for most Americans, if you get your facts from the major news outlets, okay, the major news media,
Mhm.
and every country does this. It's just not the United States. I mean, you can go to Russia and China, and you'll see the same slant from their perspective as Americans do from their perspective. But you've got to understand basically that it's a slant. Okay, that's basically propaganda and misinformation. Okay,
Yeah.
and you have to educate yourself. And I'm convinced the elites in this country already know this. Okay, man, they're not unintelligent people. I mean, they're just blind by the hubris and the power that they want to yield, and what they want to control throughout the world. Uh, we're getting a lot of pushback now, and we should be getting a lot of pushback now. Uh, we have basically, I mean, if you look at the section 1 of my book, it basically just has a historical reference to the war,
Mhm.
uh, mostly going to Ukraine post World War II. And what it basically states is that, we've been involved in there since World War II, number one. Number two, Ukraine is basically a nation that's split, internally, and it's basically been in a civil war for a long period of time, especially since 2014, with the West admittedly wanting to go and join the West, okay, the
Yeah.
western part of Ukraine. But the eastern part, especially the four regions uh, of Ukraine, the furthest eastern regions, the Donbass and Crimea, they prefer to be with Russia, okay, and that's led to basically a civil war. And another question that I bring up in the book, and I think I have the answer to it, is why would we interject ourselves in basically a civil war that's divided West and East in Ukraine?
I
So
think in the book you make it really clear that there are divided loyalties in Ukraine between people who are very loyal to Russia and very loyal to maybe a Western Germanic kind of history. And so we tend to see Ukraine as a one people, but the Ukrainians don't even see themselves that way.
yes, they're divided, and part of the divide can be seen in World War II, where um, and this again was a little bit of a history lesson for me. I mean, majoring in history and political science in college, and international relations, I was a little bit surprised
Yeah.
about how much the western portion of Ukraine supported the Nazis during World War II.
Hmm.
And the East went to the Soviet direction. Okay, so you have that great divide in this country, and it is a certain divide between East and West. And if you look at it as a hornet's nest, which is basically what it is, why would America attempt to interject itself militarily in that internal uh, fight? Okay. Now, I mean, from the American point of view, you know, the West should win, right? The West should always win.
Yeah.
Okay. And the West and Ukraine should be free to determine its own links, whether to Russia or to the United States. That's our point of view. But did we allow that to happen in Cuba? Would we allow that to happen in Mexico? The answer, of course, is obvious. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's led to, what is fair in world affairs. And that has led to what Russia gets down to the heart of what Russia's been asking for and telegraphing to us for a long period of time, is they want Ukraine to be a buffer zone.
Yeah.
They want Ukraine to be neutral. And there's a way we could have done that, and we chose not to.
So, yeah, let's talk about that, because in the book you describe the fact that NATO started off as, what was it, 34 member nation? 30.
It was 16. It was 16 originally.
Okay, so now it's grown.
Yeah, it's like 34. I mean, it's double the size, and it's actually expanded all in the direction toward Russia. Okay.
Yeah.
And of course, Russia, as part of its history, has been invaded at least 3 times by major Western nations. Napoleon, Germany in World War II.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they can be considered Russian, but further back in history, the Mongolians and Attila the Hun and those people.
Yeah.
And so they're very
sensitive
in this area, to say the least. I mean, I would use the word paranoid. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, but we've pushed that paranoia. Okay. And we tend just to, in my opinion, the reason we're doing this is because we think we can. We looked at Russia after the Berlin Wall fell down. We looked at them as an inferior country. We didn't even look at them as a world power anymore.
Yeah.
And that's how you get the Brzezinski doctrine. And I just should have, if I ever get to the point where I update my book, I'm going to put the Wolfowitz doctrine in there, because if you go back to the Wolfowitz doctrine, I mean, he pretty much spells it out that as far as our foreign policy is concerned, we should rule the world.
So we have a lot of people in our State Department, our deep state, who seem to have a grudge against Russia. They seem to have this domineering attitude that not only are we an empire, but we will not tolerate any competitors, even inferior competitors to our hegemony. So as NATO pushed towards Russia had responses, and you talk about that in the book. Do you want to discuss it?
Yeah, again, I mean, what the United States has done, okay, if you go and look at the other countries that surround Russia, okay, the ones that have borders, like Georgia, not the state of Georgia in America, but the country Georgia.
Yeah.
Okay. We interjected ourselves into Georgia too, and Georgia actually is a NATO ally. I mean, and they really are, buffering between Russia and Iran, if people don't understand the geography that clearly. And so Russia looks at what we've done in the past. I mean, they're being pragmatic here. So, well, wait a second. The Americans have gone in and they've flipped Georgia, because Georgia at one time was a Soviet Union satellite, let's put it that way. I mean, a sphere of influence. And we flipped them. So Georgia's been part of basically the NATO bloc for a long period of time. And you can go back in the history of that, and it wasn't entirely legitimate, fair elections that flipped them out of the Russian orbit into the American orbit, or the NATO orbit. And then you run into the Euromaidan revolution in Ukraine in 2014, when the current basically administration came in. It was much more favorable to America and American and NATO and Western policy than to Russia. And we assisted. We put the grease on the slides for that to occur too in 2014. I mean, just to be,
Well, we can, and I think talking about elections is something we should mention in a little bit, but
And maybe we're good at interfering with elections in this country.
yeah, I think we're well
You know,
trained, but
maybe yes, yes. Maybe we
to
brought it in domestically. I don't know. I don't want to go there, to be honest with you. But
but to stay on track with so Russia has felt this existential dread from our actions in Georgia, and I think even in Turkey, but also in Ukraine. We've just pushed closer and closer to their borders, and it's almost like we're daring them to act.
and that might be the case. I mean, we may want. Uh, I, I think I highlighted a few if I can find it real quick. What what is really driving American foreign policy? Okay, if I can find it right here. Let's see. I think I did make a note on this. I mean, I wanted to read part of the book out loud. It's
Okay.
on the chapter 16. It goes to the American hegemonic interest in peace diplomacy to end the conflict, Ukrainian conflict. And a couple of things here, I mean, that we didn't talk about the first time
Sure.
very strongly is that number one, this war and this escalation of this war was easily preventable.
Mhm.
In March and April, I mean, the Russians invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. Okay, and by March and April and May, there was a hard press with Turkey, mostly Turkey and a little bit Egypt being intermediaries between Ukraine and Russia to try to settle this conflict. And they actually not only came up with a workable solution,
Mhm.
they actually initialed and signed off on it. Okay, so it was basically a done deal. Enters Britain and the United States, is, we flew into Ukraine, we flew into Zelensky's regime or government.
Yeah.
We said, hey, no, don't do that. We got other important considerations here. Okay, we got American considerations and British considerations. Oh, and yes, we're concerned about democracy in Ukraine. Don't
Yeah.
sign that agreement. Don't sign that agreement. Don't
After
don't negotiate with Russia.
after we
Let's
mess with their
push them.
election, after we
Let's
mess with
push
their
them.
elections, we're concerned about democracy. So sorry to
You know.
interrupt.
So anyway, if you go back to, I mean, I'm going to read just a nice little chunk out of on page 122 and 123 of my book, where it basically
Okay.
says, primarily the military conflict in Ukraine, I mean, I interject Ukraine, it's not about enforcing a strategy designed to stop Russian aggression and preserving democracy in Ukraine. This result is secondary in importance to American real interest in the region. Then if you flip over on page 124, the first paragraph, it basically states the premise of the book in a nutshell. Ukraine is being systematically dismantled by the superior might of the military, Russian military. Now that's propaganda that most Americans haven't heard. I
Yeah.
mean, our propaganda that the Ukrainians can win this war. American foreign policy machinations have largely caused this tragedy to unfold. Its unstated goals, Americans' unstated goals, is to utilize Ukraine to weaken Russia, which is what our unstated goal is. Undermine Putin. We want him gone. We don't like Putin.
Yeah.
Prohibit strong economic ties between Russia and the EU. Now that seems odd that we would prefer that policy, but we want to be the major trading bloc in Europe. We don't want the Russians in. Just follow the money is one of those principles that you have to that's mostly true. Undercut the development of China's Silk, it's spelled wrong, by the way, Silk Road Initiative, okay? I didn't copy this. It's Silk Road Initiative, okay?
Okay.
And control the vast Russian economic resources and assets lying behind the unannounced objectives. Added together, they accurately identify America's real interests and motives behind its decision to intervene in Ukraine. It has little to do with preserving Ukrainian territorial integrity and supporting Ukrainian democracy. In a nutshell, that's kind of what the book is stating, and it's building the factual case to support that throughout the book. And it's not good motivations for us. Okay, we tend to want to tell other nations who the rulers are.
I think in a way it's also a chance to weaken Europe too.
Correct.
I think it
Especially
keeps,
Germany,
yeah.
especially Germany and Russia. The Germans and the Russians are natural trading partners. Okay, we
Mhm.
don't like that.
Yeah, I think it keeps Germany as our, I don't know, our errand boy, sort of a second place to us, keeps them below what they could potentially be without us.
Right.
And so there's always so many machinations on our part to hurt every nation we're dealing with. And that's the cost of being an empire. We're
Right.
always looking for how do we hurt everybody that we're allies with, and then people we're not allies with.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. I that's what I've picked up from your book. It's a great book. I think everybody should read it. I've been recommending it to everybody I talked to, and strongly recommend it again to people who are watching this podcast. So, are there any other areas of the book you want to cover? I don't
Well,
want.
yeah, generally speaking, I mean, I know because I have a tendency to, just go with the flow here.
Sure.
But I think, if you look at what the results of this war are going to be,
Yes.
uh, they're very, very unfavorable to Ukraine.
Yeah.
Uh, we put ourselves in the situation. I mean, we put the Ukrainians in the situation where if they're not careful, they'll lose Odessa because the Russians could eventually push into there, and they have
Oh,
the
that's
ability to do it. They haven't done. Odessa is basically the only major trading port that Ukraine has that allows
on the
them
block
access,
on the Black Sea,
allows
right?
them to the Black Sea. Yes,
Yeah.
so that's critical to them. Uh, if they lose that, then they become landlocked. I mean, they
Hmm.
become less of a nation. Um, and I mean, they've already lost virtually almost half their population because of the flows out of the country. A lot of Ukrainians just said, "I'm out of here. I mean, it's too dangerous for us." So I mean,
Yeah.
and those flows might not reverse in Ukraine's favor going forward for decades.
Mhm.
That's it. So Ukraine is, and besides the trillions of dollars it's going to take to rebuild the nation, I mean, it's basically being dismantled right now by the Russians. You don't hear
Yeah.
that in the American press. So that's one effect, negative effect of the war. The other, uh, there's several others. I mean, we can go into it, which are kind of important. But
You
one of
got
one of the
time.
one of the negative effects is that to the United States is we're pushing foreign policy that's against our national interests. Okay, we assert a lot of influence throughout the world through our reserve dollar currency status. Okay, and not to get into too much of how that works. That's maybe an entire, you can write books on that.
Good.
But if we lose our reserve currency status, which is what Russia and China they're up, that's what they're up to.
Yeah.
Okay, they have something called the BRICS. Okay, they're establishing a alternative system to the dollar reserve currency system in America, and they're succeeding, unfortunately for us.
Mm.
Uh, and a lot of it has to do with the way we put sanctions on nations we don't like, which is explains a lot of bio. We're losing allies in the world because we've sanctioned the heck out of dozens of nations, if not 30, 40 nations in the world.
Yeah.
The other perverse effect, if you think about it, which is not good, we've pushed China and Russia together, as allies. They're not natural allies, as I explain in my book.
Mhm.
The other thing that's really perverse is it's basically strengthened the Russian military. So we're going to end this war with America losing prestige and status because we're going to be looked at and viewed by the world and world leaders as losers in this conflict, unless we want to escalate into World War III. Okay, and the Russians are going to come out much militarily stronger, and none of that is good for America.
No.
Uh, and you wonder why the wise sages that run this country, the elites, haven't figured this out. Um, and it's all because of empiritis. I mean, we have this empire driven mentality that Russia is something that it was weakened in 1991. One of the ironies of this conflict is that we expanded NATO east toward Russian borders okay? And we pushed into the underbelly of Russia, which is, Ukraine obviously borders Russia, because we thought we could, because we thought Russia was militarily weak. Okay,
Mhm.
we thought we could push them around like we pushed around other third world nations.
Yeah.
Okay, that's turned out to be actually a false reality. We were under false assumptions when we unwound this settlement that Ukraine had worked out with Russia, and we uh, pushed for war in a different direction, because we thought this war in our favor. We thought we weaken Russia, maybe even dethrone Putin, which we
Mhm.
see as adversarial to the United States interest. Kind of along the New World Order. We want America to dominate. Okay, and we're part and parcel of creating this, and I really don't want to go in the weeds too far in this New World Order that doesn't even have boundaries of nations. I mean, that's where
Yeah.
we're. If you look at our boundary, that's kind of what's driving that issue. Okay,
Yeah.
so that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I think we covered it better this time than last time.
Well, I enjoyed it both times. And so I think what we're looking at with Russia is, you're right, a stronger nation. When Putin interviewed with Tucker Carlson, you didn't see a weak premier. I think he's a premier at this point. You didn't see someone who was weak and defeated. You saw someone who was defiant and resilient. And and that image, I think that image is going to stick with the world's perspective for a long time. And when we have our current president who has resigned from the nomination as president, it all of those factors play into this war that we should never have been involved in the first place. Our prestige is now on the line for what happens in Ukraine.
It is, and it's unfortunately going to be it's going to be Vietnam probably three or four fold. It's going to tarnish our reputation.
Yeah,
It took us over a decade to get that reputation back after Vietnam,
yeah,
and we may not recover from this one. I don't think that the American people realize that the Russians and Chinese aren't stupid. They see the $35 trillion national debt that we have.
mhm,
They see that we're overextended. They know that time is on their side.
yeah,
Okay. And they really don't have to go, unless we want to escalate into World War III right now. They don't have to do much else rather than bleed us to death with 1,000 cuts, as they say. And that's
yeah,
exactly what I'm convinced their strategy is.
yeah,
And we're falling into that terrible result if we don't pull back from it. The question is, with all empires, is can we unwind this on our own over here and say, yes, it's no longer, it's going to be a world that we're going to have to share with other major powers.
yeah.
And that's hard for Americans to accept, because we've had it, we've been top dog for a long time.
Well, you can't be top dog anymore when you've given up all your manufacturing, which is something we had to dominate. But when we've given up dominance in so many other areas, including moral authority, which we no longer have dominance in that area. I mean, Russia
Another
has
that's
more.
another that's another book.
Yeah, Russia has more moral authority than we do. And I see
Another
some of the
book.
things that Russia's doing, and I know that they got their oligarchs and they got their problems and the crime lords, and yet I'm looking at some of the things that they say and they do in their church, and their church is better off than our church. And I'm like, that's a problem. That
It is a problem, because I mean, the other thing that I learned, is that Putin was actually educated a little bit in the West. I mean,
yeah.
he has Western leanings. He naturally thinks that Russia belongs more in the Western camp than the Eastern camp. That's his natural instinct.
Hmm.
Okay, and we have basically, through our unfortunate foreign policy, pushed him away toward the East. He did not want to go there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's clear from some of his early speeches. And so, I mean, I think he's in this quandary, not wanting to entirely, cut ties with the West, because he feels affiliation and affinity with the West. Okay, uh, And he doesn't want to do that, but we're almost forcing his hand to do so, which is, to me, we can get into other critical areas that the United States foreign policy has made, since World War II. I mean,
Yeah.
we've kind of pushed, adversaries that kind of counterbalance each other, Russia and China, in a critical region of the world together. I mean, that
Yeah.
that is not bright foreign policy.
No, it's terrible. Yeah,
So
I worry that Russia will be the inheritor of the Western tradition because of some of the things we've done. So that's my
that's
concern.
yeah, and I think that's in a nutshell. That's more of a broad perspective of what I was trying to accomplish with the book. I mean, I want to peel back the reality of what we call real politic. About
Hmm.
let's brush aside all the fantasies that we have over here and that we're being fed by, that we're supporting democracy and all this other stuff in Ukraine. This pure and simple power driven, economically factored, policy is what it is.
Sure. Well, I appreciate you coming back in and discussing the book. If you write another one or if you have anything else you want to discuss, let me know, Terry. I really appreciate it.
Right, no,
This
appreciate
is
you.
this is a good book. If you haven't picked up Terry's book, go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, right? Uh, Spark Notes too.
I'm not sure. I think it's on Ingram.
Ingram, okay. So yeah, pick it up on those three platforms, and buy it. Read through it. It's a good read. Terry's very well researched, and you'll enjoy it. So again, I really appreciate the interview, Terry.
You're welcome. I appreciate what you've done. Okay.
Any final
Keep,
words?
keep the faith.
All right, you too. Take care. Bye.
All right, take care. Bye.